the Within Orb podcast. Come get Within Orb. Hello, my name is Jenn Zahrt, and welcome to Within Orb, a production of the Celestial Arts Education Library, a podcast bringing people together around the love of astrology, books. Join me as I interview people about the astrology books that changed their life and practice. You can support the podcast at withinorb.com. Welcome to another episode of Within Orb, and today we're motoring down to Portland, Oregon to meet Hawk Grubb. Hawk, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jen.
Yes.
Happy to be here.
Yes, I'm happy to have you. And when I've been really wanting to have you on, and when I asked you, you were like, well, do we have to talk about books? And I was like, you know what? No, because there are more ways to get into astrology than just books. And so I was really curious to hear, this is like the punk episode of like the no books talk. And I want to see what unfolds. So how did you get into astrology?
Great question. I was practicing magic before I was into astrology. So that kind of unfolded somewhat organically, because in Western occultism, there's obviously a lot of astrology, but not the kind that has birth charts involved. And yeah, I was just learning it. And then I realized, like, on my tarot deck, there were all these, like, there's astrology on my tarot deck. And I love a good, like, codex. Like, I love a good system of understanding reality that offers, like, a complete framework that could potentially encompass everything. And yeah, it just pulled me in, basically, from there.
Yeah.
Yeah, the how, I guess, like, how did it actually transpire that I now know anything at all about astrology? Is that Adam Elenbaas just happened to have a yoga studio down the street from my house.
Wow.
Classic third house sun ruling the ninth situation.
Wow. So you were early days at Sky House Yoga.
Yes, exactly.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I lived in Silver Spring, right where that studio was.
Right. I once got into a car accident in Silver Spring.
Oh my God. I'm so sorry.
Which is why it's memorable to me.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway. So, man, early days of Sky House Yoga. That's so cool. So were you taking yoga classes?
No, I think I literally got served a targeted ad on Facebook.
Wow.
For this class that he was doing. It was like, I was like absorbing through the like early available channels of cafe astrology. And like, I think I read like 4 sentences of the only astrology book you'll ever need.
You're like, I don't need this.
And I was just like, yeah, in some respect they were right, because I have not read many other astrology books since then, but which is kind of like the theme of this conversation, I guess.
For sure.
And yeah, so I got the targeted ad, and it was like, I didn't really know what traditional astrology was at all, but I was like, well, like, seems kind of cool. And then I just sat on the floor of the yoga studio in front of Adam for like 3 consecutive hours while he gave like a pretty much general overview of the entire framework of traditional astrology, like house rulership, essential dignity as a concept that exists, etc. And I was like, oh my God, the fact that it was a framework where its internal logic could help you extrapolate to other parts of its internal logic, and it just hangs like in this kind of like complete metaphysically coherent way, really felt like what I had been missing from astrology. And then I was just all in.
Yeah, there's a concreteness to that, or you said the word complete, but yeah, there's a kind of beauty to that.
Beauty is a great word, I think. That's exactly how it feels. I'm like, damn, it's so pretty. It's just all like hanging together and like harmonizing. I think about how Apollo like rules both music and divination. And it's like, I don't think that's a coincidence. I think in order to do beautiful, skilled divination, you have to have, a structure that allows you to understand like how things harmonize and like sing together.
Yeah, there's like an attunement to tune in, right? That's a musical word.
Yeah.
The more I'm looking into things, even in book form, though, I'll say the more it comes back to music, like the music of the spheres or the interval between planetary orbit. Kepler was going into that with sound, and the Germans in the early 20th century were going bonkers over music, really. Like all the top of the pop astrologers had something musical going on.
Yeah, it's so cool.
Are you musical?
I am actually. I studied music long before I studied magic. I was like a classically trained flute player. I played flute in a jazz band. Like growing up, I was in a youth orchestra. I was like
Yeah.
briefly first chair flutist in my middle school. And then I was in punk bands. Like growing up, I played the drums. And yeah, now I do like singer-songwriter, folk music stuff. I play the guitar, and that's been like the longest standing instrument for me. Yeah, and I actually just downloaded my first ever DAW, so I'm gonna try and make some electronic music. I think that's coming down the pipeline.
You can make talismanic music using astrology.
I'm here for that. I really am.
Question for you about the musical side of things. Like, I know you work with Apollo, and you brought up the music divination aspects of what Apollo rules, but did your experiences with being a musician and having a sense of, because it's like its own language, right? And I'm wondering if that kind of framework allowed you to absorb astrology easier because you were already working inside of something that was linked to the planetary eminences or essences.
Yeah, I've never really thought about that directly. I think that I could definitely connect it. I think when I draw divinatory conclusions, it feels very much like those perfect moments where you're like playing in a group and the whole mind, like the group mind, like coalesces for a second and just like generates a really beautiful, harmonious groove together. And it just kind of feels like you're like, oh yeah, hell yeah, we like hit the truth just then. That's sick. And I think that experience really plays into my consultation practice where I'm like vibing with somebody and using our knowledge of like reality through the lens of astrology, tarot, like what have you. It like generates this kind of otherworldly experience of like harmony and union. And being able to like get your thinking brain out of the way to like let that happen is like that's the transferable skill I think that I have from music, is being like, okay, like shut up cognition, like now we're gonna do a different kind of cognition.
That's awesome. I love that.
No offense to my thinking mind, it's a very good guy. It's doing a great job.
Yeah, yeah. So after we get up off the floor with Adam Elenbaas at Sky House Yoga in Silver Falls, Maryland, where did you go on your journey to absorb astrology into your somatic sphere?
First, I got a reading with Adam because I was like, this is tight. What can it do? And he did something that I had never seen modern astrology do, which was pull something out about another human being that I know from my natal chart. And I was like, how did you know that?
From looking at my birth.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, my friend made this meme that's just like, other people in my natal chart, it's more likely than you might think.
I know. No, I love that. That's one of my favorite things to do.
So yeah, it blew my mind. Yeah, and I was just like, okay, well, obviously I don't. There's some shit about astrology that I do not understand because I can't do that. And then I took 2 years of coursework with Adam, and then also his horary class. So that took me like 3 years. I was pretty much like set up to have like a lot. I got lucky that I started working with him as more and more courses were becoming available. So there was this nice like long form runway like starting to stretch out in front of me where I was like, oh, nice. Like, yeah, so that's pretty sick.
Mm-hmm.
So basically like 3 years of direct coursework, and class sizes were pretty small. And I like got involved with my fellow students. I found Astro Twitter in 2017, which was like just in its nascent form as like the place for trad astrologers to be talking to each other. And that I think really like actually had like a huge impact on me as well.
Yeah. Did it survive the transition to X, or is it living somewhere else now, Astro Twitter?
It's hard to say. I think the moment of total like coalescence of like everybody being in the same place at the same time inside of an algorithmic system where like we were all actually, it felt like we were all in a large room together. I think that moment has passed.
Yeah.
But you know, there's still a way to find community with other astrologers on that website. But it's no longer the kind of thing where I'm like, no brainer, you have to go to Twitter. You know what I mean? To like talk to other people. I'm starting to recommend Instagram probably more heavily for that. And I think we're starting to see this like trend of like smaller, like walled garden communities cropping up that are either like paywalled or just like quiet group chat vibes. That's like been what I've been noticing.
Wow. A little more not seen by the algos, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which is hard if you're new because it's like, how do you get in?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great question. I wouldn't know in that way.
Yeah.
How would you see someone potentially getting in?
I think that my Leo moon ass, I have a Leo moon in the ninth. So I'm like, my suggestion would just be to be yourself, like super visibly on the internet, create your own content. And my goal specifically when I started making content on Twitter is I was like, I want these people who are smart and interesting and like the thing I like, I want them to know I exist. And I want them to want to talk to me without it being me like running up to them being like, oh hey, like do you want to be my friend? Like I want to like generate a sense that like I am cool. I know what I'm talking about. And I want you to know, like I know that we have something in common and we want to be friends.
Yeah.
Because it is true in a lot of cases, but nobody has a way to know that about me if I'm not like never shutting up on the internet,
Yeah, yeah. I think that can be terrifying for some people.
100%. It was very difficult for me, honestly. I had a anonymous account with no name and no face on it for a really long time.
Wait, did you lurk yourself? Were you like lurking yourself? Like, here's my public.
No,
here's my private.
I was just at the cult problems for the first 5 years that I was on Twitter, from 2014 to 2019. And then I went to Norwalk and Chris Brennan of all people was like, you have to put your face on your profile. And he even added Austin to bully me collectively in the nicest, most we've all been there way, because I know Austin posted under a pseudonym for a really long time in his early career.
Baron from whatever. Yeah, he was Baron something or another on MySpace. Yeah,
that was totally before my time, but Chris tagged him in and was just like, ask this guy about putting your actual face on the internet.
Yeah.
And that, I think the combined forces of my excitement about them doing that led me to do it, because I was going to Norwalk and I was like, none of you motherfuckers are gonna know who I am. Like, what am I gonna do? Like, walk around with a little mask in my profile picture? Like, this isn't gonna work.
That's actually funny. Did you notice a shift then? And once you attached your picture to yeah?
I think so. I'm not sure it was that conscious, but it's yeah, I think so. It was my picture and my name. I think it's just easier for people to remember, and it's easier for people to be like, oh, that's a human being. It's not just part of the sea of anonymous accounts who are spectating and not really participating. Because I come from festival culture, if that makes sense, which is part of my background. After punk music came the festival scene. Mm-hmm. And there's a difference between being a patron and a participant, where you can pay $300 and go to the festival, or you can volunteer, work on crews, bring your own theme camp. There's always these opportunities to create the scene. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually, that ethos translates really well to my experience in the astrology and occult community. It's you can totally be a consumer and that's completely allowed. But if you have something to offer and bring to the festival, as it were, that's sick. And other people will see you doing it and be like, oh, this is dope. I'm going to come hang out at your theme camp. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I like that way of thinking about the different type of what you would call walled gardens popping up. It's more like theme camps. You want to hang out over here and do Orphic Hymns? Great. I can give you a suite of people doing that right now. And then there's others doing other stuff. And if you love that, go there.
Yeah. I'd love to make a little index on my website or something that's just kind of are you into this specific sub niche? Because this is one of my blessings as a human being, is I've been just surrounded by geniuses at all times, it seems like.
Well, you call them in with that Leo moon shining in the ninth. You have no fear, or you've been able to tame the fear of being able to be yourself and say hey, here I am and I'm going to do this. Yeah. And it's oh, cool.
Yeah. I made it a priority. It really did get a lot of my energy for a really long time. You can't let your self-esteem be impacted by it not working, especially if you're not making it the second most important thing you're doing in life, which is what I was doing at the time that I was doing that. So if you're just oh, I made 3 posts and nobody cared, I must suck more than Hawk, maybe. No, that's not what's happening.
Well, some people feel rejection with the lack of engagement, right? It's this sort of
Me too,
oh
honestly.
No, right?
Perhaps I am trash.
Yeah, but you kept going. And I think now, you're a fixture in a way.
Yeah, I have to keep doing it, regrettably, which is just a nightmare. It's you could never just hop
off the train.
Yeah, I mean, I'm mostly kidding. I really enjoy it. Obviously, the Leo moon is like, pay attention to me.
Yeah, I'm shining. Yeah. Imagine stepping into a room of 5,000 astrology books, turning a corner and stepping into a room of 2,000 more. The Celestial Arts Education Library is every astrologer's dream, and it can be yours. I invite you to come support CAELi before you can visit physically. Your support will mean the creation of 52 new episodes of Within Orb next year, 4 issues of the CAELi Review, our inaugural journal, and countless book talks, events, classes for our community. Visit our website, www.caeli.institute/support, to select your level of care. Please help support CAELi into the future, our future, so that we may study the future together. Thank you for listening. Please enjoy the rest of the show. I think astrology grabs you, and it doesn't need to happen only through books. These relationships with peers and the conversations, like books are just ossified conversations if you think about it.
Damn, I love that. I want to write that down. That slaps so hard, honestly, because that's so connected to my whole ethos of the friendship lineage, which is just a term that I have coined lately to talk about my whole strategy for existing as an occultist.
Go on.
Well, there's always been these hierarchical modes of teacher-student transmission. And I have this thought that actually it's less like that than the 19th century British occultists who do lodge magic would lead us to believe. That it's less this chain of transmission from master to student, and less like a Jedi order and more just a social circle,
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of a friendship lineage and having just the homies, being your main source of education, other brilliant people who are super fascinated by the same things you're fascinated with and are committing just huge amounts of time and energy to being smart on those topics, and then info dumping to you and getting really excited. I've learned so much more that way than I have from reading.
Yeah.
And I've learned more completely, you know what I mean? Because I get this beautiful distillation of 700 hours that the person has put into being fascinated by a topic, right?
And you're swipe, thank you. But you're giving back too. I mean, it's an exchange, because you're also doing your own 700 hours, and then that conversation's mind-blowing because it's here, swap. You can have this tech and I'll give you that tech.
Exactly. It's this beautiful web that exists, and that's the visual image that I have for the non-hierarchical friendship lineage is that it's less like a ladder and more like a web.
Yeah. There was this moment in graduate school when I was sitting there, I think it was either the 18th century class, which really had my eyeballs rolling in the back of my head because of what that century did to astrology, obviously, right?
Yeah.
And I noticed that the professor in that course was not really my kind of teacher, and I was learning more from my fellow students than from the instructor, and brought that up. And at some point, they were yeah, I mean, at this level, you're going to be learning from each other more than any of us can impart something to you. It's everybody in the course is noticing different things and they're learning all together. It's not just the top down.
I actually love that because that is so relevant to the way that I want to teach and learn astrology and magic at this point. Is it's I want to be communing with other people who are at the graduate school level.
Yeah, it's a seminar and not one of these monster broadcasting weed out courses, right?
Right. Well, those are really important because it's if 1,000 people want to learn intro to astrology, it's great, everybody come over here and we could get you all sorted out at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah, but if you want to drive your car up the complicated terrain, that's going to be less people doing that.
100%, yeah. It's funny. I'm imagining a rock climbing culture where we're all just sitting at the edge of a very perilous crag, being oh, sick, man. You really crushed that.
Yeah, I know, right? Yeah. There's a new movie. What's it called? I think it's about that guy who climbed El Cap in Yosemite, and now he's climbing something.
Alex Honnold?
Yeah. He basically goes to Greenland and has a film crew with him to talk about global warming and climate change. And he takes them with him as a pretext to he's so what? Another movie about a dude bro climbing an unclimbed face? That's boring. I want to do something good with my platform. So I'm going to bring along a scientific crew. And I noticed that when he was commenting on his fellow climber going up, he was just really encouraging. And this person was clinging to the edge of a very steep rock. And he's just nice move. Yo,
Yes, that's so like I love like this piece of climber culture. I'm yeah, and I was also a big rock climber in college, and like I love that about climber culture, and I see it with my fellow pro astrologers and magic people like on Instagram and stuff. You know, they'll like say something wildly brilliant, and everyone will just be like, "Nice move."
Yeah,
You
right.
know? Like
It's funny,
sick.
like doing chart work interpretation as though you're doing a problem on the face of a rock, and it's like, I got there this way. And it's like,
Yeah.
no, I'm gonna get there this way. And it's like, look, we got to the same place, totally different.
Yeah,
You
I feel
know?
that way when I hang out with my evolutionary astrologer friend, Sabrina Monarch. Like, we'll
Yeah.
just be like talking about the same chart, and it's like completely different strategies for understanding, but we'll be able to have these heady, high level conversations like that. You know, that image of Plato's Symposium
Mhm.
where it's just like they're all like walking and like being like dramatic philosophers. Like, that's how I feel when I'm
That's
conversing with
awesome.
my astrology buddies.
See, you brought in a book, Plato's Symposium. There it is.
It's a picture, to be fair. I'm talking about a picture that's
But I had to talk about that book twice in my academic life. And then one of them, I think it was in that one, doesn't Plato talk about love? And the professor just goes, "What is love?" And I'm like, what does this pertain to? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, I tried to read The Republic recently, and oh my god, dude.
You were gonna get to the myth of Ur?
Exactly. It's at the very fucking end. I tried to get through the entire book because I thought it would be pertinent, but it's like literally just a sidebar at the end.
I know, it's really short, but it's like, okay, line up, pick your lot.
It's so irrelevant to the rest of the text. I was so not expecting that.
But it's so fundamental to cosmology.
I know, it's very odd. It's like literally like it's as if you're like having this like giant lecture with the bros, and then like all of a sudden a guy like interrupts and starts telling you about a dream he had. Like that's like kind of how it feels.
But that's the important part. That's how you know it's important.
Yeah. Damn.
Yeah. Like there's this thing about utopias, Thomas More's Utopia. Any utopia, they're like, yeah, I was on this ship and then I don't know how we got here. I must have fallen asleep. And so it's like you can't find where the utopia is at because they just completely elide or like hide how they got there.
Yeah, this feels relevant to like the whole like kind of theme of this convo where it's like when you're like learning magic or whatever, it helps. It's like there is the first 12 chapters of the Republic version where you can like discourse in a very orderly manner, or you can just kind of like have a spiritual hallucinatory experience. And like maybe like that part is actually equally valuable, if not more useful to some.
Right. I mean, you got to astrology through magic, and I'd say moving to the Pacific Northwest, I began doing plant alchemy and some animal works with the Spagyricus School with Robert Allen Bartlett.
Oh, I've heard a lot of things about that lately for some reason. It's just popped up.
Yeah, they're relaunching it as the TriStar Academy and working with the application of alchemy that does have a kind of celestial counterpart in a way of just, when you should be doing what, obviously, but also the kind of things of like, oh, here's a Marshall plant or a Venus plant, and then knowing actually that plants are very complicated and don't like just being uniruled by one planet, that you can do all this very like fractal, oh, but the stems are always Mercury no matter what, and the roots are always Saturn no matter what. And so you have like parts of the plant that are planetary, and then as a whole, the plant is generally aligned with this or that. And Blagrave talks about, like, if you're talking about dandelion or something, like you've got to get it. If you want the solar aspects, you use these timings. And if you want Jupiter aspects, you use those timings. All to say, though, is that the experience of making something taught me more about astrology than reading a book.
Yes, it's like direct communion.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Yeah. I'm actually like want to like write down what you just said about dandelion because I'm like, wait, this sounds fascinating. What is this? How do I go find that?
I have an article about it I can send you.
That'd be great.
It's on astro.com and it'll be in the show notes, everyone.
Nice.
Yeah, I think that complexity, even in the past, our astrological ancestors were definitely thinking in more complex terms than simple binaries.
100%. And yeah, I was just talking to Eric Purdue before I got on this call, and he was saying something about the fact that a lot of like books in ancient transmission of information were kind of closer to like notes that somebody wrote down for their students than they are to like texts that were supposed to have like a wide release to be purchased by consumers. You know what I mean? Like that whole model just like didn't exist at all. It was just like, oh, like you are my student, I'm teaching you the arts. Here are the bones, basically. And I want you to have this to reference so you can remember all the shit we are talking about, right?
Because it's a
like
lot.
it's actually about the shit we are talking about and not about this like text. And I think right now this is a classic like age of air thing versus age of earth thing, where it's like now we have widespread transmissions of ideas. They can like travel far and wide beyond the accessibility to an individual teacher. So I think that text transmissions of any kind, like verbal transmissions of any kind, are like filling this gap where it's like you don't have like a convenient community of people to talk to one-on-one about your thing. So it's like, excellent, I'm going to read like 17 books. And that's tight.
But it doesn't replace that human conversation.
If you don't have the human conversation, like you can have the divine conversation. Like you can have the conversation like with Dandelion, right? And be like, what is your deal? Actually, you can directly interface with the spirits of the arts you're trying to like learn.
Right. Like how you met Apollo. How did you meet Apollo?
Oh, I was like harangued by Cromans, by crow omens for a long time. And he's a deity I've just been aware of for a really long time. And, you know, I always say this to my students and my mentees and my clients where I'm like, it's always the guy that you're like, oh, it couldn't possibly be that guy. He's too cool. You know what I mean? Yeah. You know, he has always had that like kind of like golden boy vibe. And this is meaning making after the fact, but I've met other people who've had similar experiences where it's like, I think once you get sufficiently good at divination, he like drafts you. Like first team. If that makes sense. He's like,
I'm feeling subpar. I haven't been drafted by Apollo.
I think it's, yeah, I mean, it's obviously a very specific type of person. Maybe it requires to have a Leo 9th also. It's like maybe. You're like sun draft, right? There's like yeah. So I think it's like if you're a specific brand of human being, which to me, I'm like a Leo moon blonde person who is a lifelong musician and does divination. And I like to like do extreme sports and like go fast, you know what I mean? Who also fucks with the Hellenic pantheon. So it was just kind of like, there's literally nothing missing there.
I love it.
And then it was like, once I like really committed to being a career diviner, he was just like, hello.
Welcome home, right?
Yeah. And then I was like, I don't know what you want from me. And he was like, it wasn't like answered. Mm-hmm. Like he just kind of like showed up really hard. So, you know, I started working with Asclepius first. And then I think it kind of like transitioned because Apollo like scared me for some reason. I was like, I've heard like negative things about you from your mythosphere. And you just are terrifying in this really like profound way, which is attested to in myth. Like he has a face that just delivers like inscrutable and disturbing prophecy, basically. And like people were like afraid to utter that name, like that version of his name.
Wow.
And I think that really shows up in his like energy. You're just like, damn, you're like low key very scary. So I was a little bit
hence the crows, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know. I wasn't scared of Asclepius because I mean he's like more human in that way, if that makes sense. He's like kind of by nature more like a person. He's like an emissary to like the material world because he's like half divine, half human. His mother was like a regular old human being. And he's like front facing with the medicine aspect. He's like, we're doing health. And so I'm like, okay, well, it's very pro-human.
We're going to keep you on Earth a little longer.
Exactly. But with Apollo, you kind of like lose that humanity a little bit. And it just becomes like more frightening, I think.
For sure. For sure. Well, I think too, then, you know, in that connection component with the human, you know, human beings are meant to connect to other human beings. And I remember learning something from Bernadette Brady when it was an audio recording of her teaching about fixed stars. And she said, there's a lot here. There's 72 at least in her personal pantheon of which ones she thinks are important. And then you talk to Cam Cassidy and you learn about 600 other ones. But anyway, so Jesus. Bernadette's like, okay, 72. How are you even going to begin? You know, with basic ABC astrology, you get 12 signs, roughly 10 planets, a lot of other celestial factors, you know, 3s and 4s. And suddenly you've got 72 fixed stars that are all over the map. How do you do that? And she said, pretend the stars are someone you're meeting in a class or in your neighborhood. And then it's easy to remember their name because you give them a face and you relate to it as though you're meeting someone new. And that to me was just this mind-blowing tip of like, of course, that's exactly right. I mean, the ability to have facial recognition with people is a lot higher than looking at a line of text and trying to remember a fact, you know?
Totally. Yeah, and I think that's one of the huge advantages this like huge like wave of animist astrology like brings to the table, where people are like, now the overlap of magic and astrology is something of a no-brainer, I think, to a lot of trad astros, but it wasn't like that even in 2017 when I first like broke into the like wider community. People weren't doing that. Austin was doing it verbally. Like that was the person I saw in my limited view, basically. That was who I saw doing it. But now that it's become so much more normalized, it's like, well, you are meeting somebody, like you're meeting the star, like that is happening.
Yeah, and if you do any outside observation at night and you see like the light in your eyeball, it is immediate. It's almost like space stops existing and there's this direct contact, you know?
Yeah, I'm thinking about Sirius right now, who just like strobes violently in the sky. Oh god, that star is insane.
40 times brighter than our sun.
What?
Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
I was thinking about, it's fun that we got to Apollo because I'm actually like, I didn't even think about this when we sat down, but I'm looking at your Vesta card that you handed out at, I think it was Norwalk, but I saw you give a talk on these oils. Like you made a series of Vesta oils that were like highly experimental in nature. And you gave a talk about it at Astromagia in 2022.
Sure. Yeah.
Sure.
I have no, it could have been 2021. It was pandemic times. Like,
anyway, it absolutely slapped. And I feel like it was just this incredible example of like how we can use textual knowledge and then like bring that to bear on a more experiential form of doing magic and forming direct relationship. Like that was the crux, I feel like, of the working, was that you built direct relationships with these like 7 Vestal priestesses.
Yeah, they're still here.
Yeah.
They hang out. We hang out all the time. Yeah, you got plucked by Apollo. I got completely wrestled to the mat by Vesta.
Well, I was sitting in your class listening to you talk about this, and like my eyeballs stopped perceiving the world around me, and it was suddenly like, you have to make me an oil, like from Apollo. He was like, hello, are you listening?
Ding, ding, ding.
And I did it. I made a pretty functional Apollo oil that's right over there. I'm looking at it.
Amazing.
And like the recipe like downloaded into my brain like while you were talking. And I don't know, I love that we got to this like thing because it just feels like a great example of how like human interconnection is like a great teacher, you know?
Yeah. And then after these experiences, that's what becomes the book, right? You live the book first, and then you can record it in book form or audio or. And I appreciate you, you know, when I asked you to come on, I was like, hey, let's talk astrology books. And you're like, let's not. And I'm like, awesome. let's do that.
You know what? I had to like wrestle internally to like give you that response, because I almost just kind of politely like stepped away from the option, because I was like, it's a podcast about text, and like, you know, I'm not really that kind of like learner, and like I didn't want to be like difficult. And I also like, you know, it's like we exist in a world where that mode of knowing and that way of knowing is like really heavily prioritized, especially inside academia and in a lot of the overculture. And it was easier to say to you than it would have been to some other people, but like I had to like have a moment internally to be like willing to be like, actually, like I'm not really a big book guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. No, but I think that the things we've covered so far in our conversation are a testament to like where books actually come from. Ideally, the best books come from this type of direct experience, or the kinds of experiences that lead to an innovative take. It's not just putting together quotes that other people have thought. You know, there's something lived about a living text that then lives on in its immortality after the author dies. And there's this transmission quality to it, but that transmission is always rooted in something that's alive, or that has been alive, or that has been experienced, that is not on the page or taken from a page. And so you've invited that concept here very fully and allowed that to be present in, you know, this collection of what's your favorite book? And it's like, how about the one I'm living?
Yeah.
And there's people who've talked about non-existent books or books they would write and such. But I think there's something else about like, you can learn astrology without books, and you can also innovate without books. And it doesn't mean you're not informed, but you have a lot of, as you've said, you have a lot of smart friends who probably distill all that reading and give you the nugget. And
they're reading books.
Yeah, you're like, oh, but I got all the gold nuggets here. I don't need to do that yourself as an activity, because there's some people who are not made for that kind of thing, and that's fully okay.
Yeah, my friends are crushing it. Like, they're all over it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And we'll even have these conversations, and they'll be like, "Oh shit, that's attested to in XYZ," and then I have a citation that I did not have at all before the conversation.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the Orphic Hymns, which is like one of our like most pointed at pieces of astrotheology in history. It's very well thought of, right, as a text. That is a series of individual things that were like drawn down from like direct experience with divinity, right? Like, that's not just like a transmission of like, some guy told me this, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like they're literal addresses to divine people that were presumably created after like a long period of practice and relationship with those divine people. I mean, I have no idea, but it's just, I don't know. I feel like that's just like a great example of like a historical version of that.
Yeah, and it becomes authoritative because it's old, but it's like, well, let's think about the moment of its creation, and so many things were orally transmitted that are devalued because they aren't the textual tradition. So anyway, where can people find you?
I have a website, hawkstrology.com. I'm most active on Instagram in terms of social media. So my @ is Hawkstrology, like hawk like the bird, and then astrology, the back half of the word astrology.
The back half.
Yeah.
Good. Very cool. Well, thank you for taking time to share your lily pad of astrology with us today on Within Orb.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me and agreeing to do this atypical episode.
Thank you for listening to Within Orb. To learn more about the Celestial Arts Education Library, or to become a member, visit our website at CAELi.institute. That's www.caeli.institute. If you enjoyed this episode, please help spread the word. Follow or subscribe to Within Orb in your podcatcher of choice, rate it 5 stars, or write us a happy review. This helps others find the show. We also want to give a big thanks to the indie band The E-Block for contributing their song Wake Up for our intro and outro music. You can find them at their website, eblockband.com. This is Jenn Zahrt, signing off for now. See you next time.